Back to our top story this hour. Israeli warplanes continue to pound Gaza, and there's no end in sight. Here's what we know right now for you. Palestinian security sources say at least 277 people are dead in Gaza and hundreds more are wounded. The Israelis say their assault has targeted Hamas militants and has sharply reduced Hamas rocket attacks on Israel. Israel is calling up 7,000 military reservists. Meanwhile, tanks are being deployed around Gaza, but Israel denies having any plans to reoccupy the territory. Now, a look at the conflict from the Israeli perspective. A few minutes before the show, I had the opportunity to speak with Israel's ambassador to the United States, Sallai Meridor. Mr. Meridor, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon on CNN.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start with numbers that you're very familiar with. First off, Palestinian reports have casualties at over 275 at this moment as a result of Israeli airstrikes. On the other side, we have reports of one Israeli casualty as a result of Gaza rocket fire. The question is the force being undertaken at the moment proportional and reasonable?
I think it's very reasonable given the threat the Israeli civilians are under. We are talking about more than 500,000 Israelis, which is almost 1 of every 10 Israelis, who are living now under constant daily threat of rocket barrage. We are talking about children who are wetting their beds at night. We are talking about parents who don't know what of their children to go and save into a safe room when the rockets are being fired. We are talking about elderly people who cannot take a shower because they don't know whether they will make it in 15 seconds into a shelter.
How many more casualties is Israel going to accept to achieve its goals?
We are not looking to accept any casualty. And we don't want really to have casualties on the other side. What we want is the fire of terror to stop. What we want is for our children to be able to live in peace. And we are taking action in order to defend our people, as I believe every normal nation, be it Israelis, Americans, or others, would do to protect their citizens. This is a horrible situation where we have to take actions of self-defense. In doing so, we are trying to make every possible effort to minimize the damage to uninvolved civilians. But we have to take steps to protect our people.
You are very aware of the reaction around the world from these airstrikes and the military action that has been taken over the last 24 hours. Among those reactions, and Al-Manar TV, Hezbollah's official TV station, the statement was made that the north of Israel will be put on fire just as Gaza has been put on fire. Tanks and troop carriers have been moved to the borders regions of Gaza. We've seen the pictures of that. We've also called up 7,000 reserve troops, and then there's street protests from Yemen to Morocco. Is there some concern? Is there the awareness that this could go down a path that is both broader and more uncontrollable than originally thought?
Well, we certainly hope that nobody, extremists in the region like Iran or Hezbollah, will try to exploit this situation. We are obviously taking this into account and are ready for every eventuality. However, I think that in your question, there is this context that is broader and regional. And we have in this region Iran that is trying to undermine any progress towards peace, that is trying to undermine any beginning of democracy, that is supporting through two proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, north of Israel, Hamas in Gaza, southwest of Israel. And in this regional context, all of us together, people of goodwill and of shared values, have to stand together against terror and against this attempts to destabilize the region and undermine any efforts for democracy and peace.
There are many similarities here, Mr. Ambassador, to the Hezbollah-Israeli war. Will we then see troops on the ground, movements of troop carriers, as well as tanks into the Gaza Strip?
Well, I am not going to discuss at this stage where probably some people of Hamas and some people in Tehran may listen to our discussion. However, I think that what's important to note is that there is a line connecting all of those dots, which is starting in Iran, which is basically the center of an octopus with proxies throughout the region. And the same tactics that they are using in Lebanon, they're trying to use in Gaza.
And coming up in the next hour of Newsroom, the Palestinian perspective, we will talk live with the Palestinian ambassador to the United Nations. We're going to talk to Palestine's permanent observer to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour. He joins us from New York live. Thank you for joining us this evening.
You're welcome.
Let me start with this, Mr. Mansour. There have been concerns about the rocket attacks since before the end of the ceasefire, which 2 months before the ceasefire ended, the reports of rockets going into Israel. And then there were 80, 20, 40 rockets since the end of the ceasefire going into Israel, these attacks with rockets coming from the Gaza Strip. Isn't it justified that Israel is defending itself at this moment?
Well, at this moment, killing and wounding 1,000 Palestinians in 24 hours cannot be justified whatsoever. From the point of view of international law, there is the concept of proportionality. If something that, let's say, a rocket to be fired from Gaza, that doesn't mean that you have to unleash the military power of Israel against the civilian population, 1.5 million Palestinians in Gaza. That is not just, that is not fair, that is not humanitarian. What we need to do now, as the Security Council decided at 2 o'clock this morning, the ceasefire has to be in place. All military activities in Gaza should be stopped. And from our point of view, this means that the Israeli aggression against our people in Gaza need to be stopped immediately, and humanitarian material, medicine and other material need to enter Gaza to address the catastrophic situation of our civilian population. And then we need to go back to the ceasefire that was in place for 6 months to allow for the political process to be resumed.
Mr. Mansour, you have outlined what the UN Security Council came out with overnight in their resolution, saying that, number one, the airstrikes should stop. Number two, openings should be allowed so that humanitarian aid can flow into Gaza. That is what was on the resolution. And you have said that after 48 hours, if those airstrikes have not stopped, you will then relook at what needs to be done to stop Israel and its actions. Why wait 48 hours when so much violence and so much death is happening right now?
Well, what we prefer is not to wait even more than 24 hours. The idea of waiting for a day or two to give Israel an opportunity to comply with the position of the Security Council to stop all military activities. And we sincerely hope that Israel would stop this process of slaughtering and killing hundreds of Palestinians and wounding more than 1,000 of innocent civilians. If Israel does not comply with the wish of the Security Council, then we have to go back again to the Security Council and request from them, what are you going to do about bringing Israel into compliance with your wish, the wish of having a ceasefire immediately in place, so that we can stop this massive cycle of violence and killing large number of Palestinians. The great number of them are innocent people, and they should not be facing that situation.
We had the opportunity to speak with the Israeli ambassador to the United States earlier today, and he told me about external influences in Gaza. Let's take a listen to him now and what he had to say earlier.
I think that what's important to note is that there is a line connecting all of those dots, which is starting in Iran, which is basically the center of an octopus with proxies throughout the region, and the same tactics that they are using in Lebanon, they're trying to use in Gaza.
And so the concern there, Mr. Ambassador, is that of the external influence and how that might be affecting what Israel is trying to defend against right now. How do you respond to that?
If there is a connection between Iran and the political group in Hamas, does this mean that Israel should be authorized to go and unleash its military power against 1.5 million Palestinians? Does that mean that 1.5 million civilian Palestinians should be punished in a collective way in contravention to international law? It does not make sense that an entire population should suffer as a result of action of a political group that may have a relationship with a country here or a country there. That kind of argument is immoral and it cannot be justified. The entire population of Gaza, the civilian population, should not be punished in this method as the Israeli army is doing, for example, during the last 24 hours, killing and injuring more than 1,000 people. Many of them are children in UNRWA schools and women.
But
and
Mr.
civilian
Mansour,
population cannot be justified.
Mr. Mansour, Israel has said if the rocket attacks stop coming from Hamas into Israel, it will move to normalize relations to some extent. Why not just stop the rocket attacks coming from Hamas?
We, the Palestinian side, under the leadership of President Abbas, organized unilateral ceasefires in 3 occasions. 2 occasions when President Abbas was in charge of Gaza, and the last one was during the last 6 months under the control of Hamas. In all these occasions, the Palestinian side was respecting the ceasefire, but in return, Israel was doing 2 things. They were frequently having incursions and assassinating and targeting individuals in the Gaza Strip. And 2, they were blocking the entire Gaza Strip from having food and basic necessities, including medicine, so that the life of Palestinians in Gaza was unbearable. For a ceasefire to continue, and we are in favor of the return of the ceasefire, it has to be respected by both sides, and the Palestinian people in Gaza should not be collectively punished as a result of the ceasefire.
Riyad Mansour, Palestine's permanent observer to the UN, thank you for joining us this evening.
You're very welcome.
Now, as we were speaking